So good morning. My name is Sarah Ruiz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Ashray Foundation. I'm gonna pop up some slides and share those as we go. This training is being recorded. Um, so I will make a quick edit and then post it and share the link with you, ideally by the end of today, because I know we have a short turnaround since our offsite clinic with you all in Sikeston is next Friday. Ugh, what's happening with time? Um, so I'm gonna plow through some of the context stuff. I'm gonna go through it pretty quickly so that we can focus on the document processing and like day of logistics and what it'll feel like. Um, I have a couple of volunteers from St. Louis that are going to come down with me on Friday so that we can have some additional support. So we will take a shadow or support role if we have enough volunteers there. And if not, and we all need to throw down, like, then we will all do it together and we will help whoever is there with the time that we have. I did want to also mention, Yolanda, I'm so sorry. I thought I had shared the flyer with you. I clearly had not. But I did email you a flyer. Registration for the appointments, if people want to schedule an appointment, is online. That's live. That's also linked in the flyer. So if you have any questions or any issues with that, let me know. We, I would say, don't have to do appointments, but it's helpful. So like if we, for capacity wise, so if we get a bunch of appointments and it's like, oh my God, we're gonna have 100 people, then I'll rent a van and we'll bring more people down and we'll make it work. But if not, then we'll just help people as they come. No big deal. So let me pull up my slides and we will get started. Feel free to pop in the chat or interrupt me, flag me down. I think I usually arrange my screen here so I can see everyone. But feel free to ask questions as we go. And let's dig in. Does that work for everyone? You can hear me okay, right? Yes? Okay, cool. And you can see slides, right? Woohoo! We're happy Monday. It's not Monday, but it feels
Yes.
like it. So I just want to tell you briefly that Ashray Foundation is a private nonprofit, a public nonprofit, independent nonprofit in St. Louis City. We work statewide, but we're relatively new. So our statewide efforts are smaller and mostly focused around the photo ID work. So we have program sort of responsive programming and core programming. Our core programming focuses in photo ID assistance and access. And then our responsive programming is looking at ending poverty and homelessness, addressing and ending gun violence, supporting nonprofits, and making sure that we are intentionally working to dismantle competitive nonprofit systems and work towards collaboration. And now also building programming to support immigrant families in Missouri. My background, for what it's worth, is in immigrant justice. I've spent my academic and professional career has been in nonprofit supporting immigrant work. So this has been a transition in this current role. Ashray was founded in 2022. We is when we began operations. So this will be year 3 for us. So we're still a little baby guys in the organization, but we were founded by a Reformed Jewish rabbi here in St. Louis who has a long-standing history in the region. We have a deeply involved board. We now have a staff that's more than me, which is great. So we have a lot of experience behind us, but still relatively new as an organization. So I want to start first with the conversation around an ID. When was the last time that you used your ID? If you could come off mute, let me know or pop it in the chat.
Yesterday,
What'd you use it for?
I got ID'd when I was trying to buy me something to drink.
Yep, love it.
Just saying.
Yes, I mean, yes. I have a good follow-up to that. When else did you use your ID most recently?
I can't recall the last time I used it. I know I use it a lot, but I do know my wife's vehicle has been kind of acting up. And yesterday, when I went in to go pay for that, I noticed that on the door it said, if you're paying by check, you need to have ID. So, I mean, that's kind of even though, you know.
Seems like forever ago, but how many of us voted? You probably need your ID for that. if you've picked up prescription medication, cash a check, you need an ID for all of those things, as you know. So when I look at why are we doing all of this around an ID, something that I will admit that when you grow up sort of with the privilege and stability that I grew up with, I didn't know this was a thing, right? Because it was always just part of my life. I've never been fortunate enough to never have a space where I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this, or I don't have what I need in order to do it. But you need an ID for so many necessities and also for joy, right? So I'm really glad that you said that, Yolanda, because um, even things like, sure, we could talk about buying alcohol or tobacco, but also you need an ID to get into comedy clubs, piano bar, like a lot of social events. I think the last concert I went to, like at what is not called Riverport anymore, because that's what it was called 25 years ago, but whatever theater, like you need an ID to get into places that actually also just bring you joy in your life. And that's part of the world that I want to fight for. So yes, we need an ID, medicine, healthcare, emergency housing, long-term housing. You can't sign a lease or a mortgage without an ID. Enrolling in school, cashing checks, accessing financial services, getting a job. We know those are sort of the like obvious ones, right? But there's so many more behind that are in addition to how we want to live. So an ID has become traveling. Thanks, Joey. Like an ID has become fundamental to a lot of our basic and thriving sort of needs in life. We could take a long caveat and I could talk to you for an hour about how this came to be because it wasn't always like this. And I could draw big shifts in following 9/11 and how IDs changed since then. It started before that, I would say 1986, we could talk about, but the need for proving your identity and connected to that, proving your citizenship in a lot of ways, which we could asterisk and say lawful status, right? Um, all of that is now wrapped up in this sort of suspicion, homeland security, national identity piece. So it gets real messy real fast. But we know that for the people we serve, this is sometimes the most basic access and barrier to what you need to survive and thrive. However, more than 26 million American adults don't have an ID, which is wild, right? That's like almost 10% of the entire population of the United States, right? That is an insane amount of people that don't have this very fundamental document, right? And there are lots of intersecting analyses that we could do with that, right? So let's think about poverty. 38 million Americans live in poverty. 26 million, 38 million. I would love to see the studies that say if this, then that, and here's how they're related, right? So we know that it gets more complicated than just they don't have it. We also know that so many people don't have access to the underlying documents you need in order to get that ID, right? And so it becomes the ID and then everything you need in order to get the ID. Those are also we also see additional barriers to those. And I would say this also follows underlying systemic social and economic and racial inequities, right? So where we already have divisions in our society, we see those exacerbated in the photo ID space. A recent study, this was published in 2023, by the Movement Advancement Project, outlined 5 systemic barriers to ID access, right? So 5 primary reasons that people can't get an ID. I would like to say that not one of these reasons is because they're lazy, because they don't want to, because they're dumb, because they're irresponsible, right? These are systemic barriers. These are reasons that irregardless of someone's personal agency or lack thereof, or capacity or lack thereof, these barriers exist, right? So the first is this burdensome documentation requirements. We're going to go into that ad nauseum today. That people, it is complex and confusing, especially if you are getting an ID in Missouri, but you weren't born here. And especially if you weren't born in the United States. So it gets real messy real fast in terms of what you need in order to get this literal one document that opens the door to accessing so much. We're also going to talk about financial costs. When I think about cost, I think about primary and secondary costs. So the primary cost of photo ID in Missouri non-driver ID is $18. For some, those of us that have gainful employment, $18 is not an insurmountable barrier. For those of us that are living in the street, that are seeking emergency shelter on nights like tonight and trying literally to stay alive, $18 is an impossible Herculean task. In addition to the primary cost, you have the secondary costs. So if you need your birth certificate to get your ID, a birth certificate is $15, but you need documents in order to get that. Oftentimes you need your social security card. And in order to get that, you often need other documents. So if you don't have an ID, you can't get a social security card unless you can get some other things, which oftentimes might mean you need to be seen by a doctor and get some medical records. Cost, right? Additionally, in St. Louis, and I would love to hear from you later today when we talk, is like the cost of getting there, of actually going to get the documents. I can take off work, no problem, and go get my ID or my birth certificate, and I can stand in line and I can frustratingly come home and get the things I didn't have and go back again until I win, right? But for other people, do you have to take a bus? Do you have to borrow a car? Do you have to get gas in your car? Are you going to have to drive a car without a license or without insurance? Can you get to where you need to go? Can you get there while you're at work, while you're not at work? Are you going to lose your job if you can't get there, right? Who's going to take care of your kids or your elders if you're taking care of them, in order that you can get and do this thing that you have very little control over how long it will take, right? So the secondary costs also add up in this space as well. There's also limited availability of ID services. So in Missouri, for example, there is not a single ID office in every county, right? So there are some counties that don't have a Department of Revenue license office, which means you have to travel more than 2 hours sometimes to get to one. Even in the city, for example, St. Louis City has about 300,000 people. We finally just opened our third license office. That means we have 3 offices that serve the entire city. Sounds like a lot, I'm sure, to some folks in the county, but the statewide average is that one office serves about 35,000 people. In St. Louis, one office is serving about 100,000 people. So we know that those experiences are also going to be different. We can also talk about the hours of these license offices. As I mentioned, if folks are working multiple jobs or having jobs with fixed hours, oftentimes it's nearly impossible to get to an ID office and get your ID outside of your working hours, which means you have to take off work or miss work in order to do it. We've had issues with physical accessibility. Yes, ADA compliance is a thing, right? That's real. And if no one is enforcing it, it doesn't happen. So we have folks that, for example, in one of the 3 City of St. Louis offices during COVID, they took out the chairs for waiting because they weren't, it was that whole like distancing and no contact thing. They have not put chairs back into that office. And so every time I've gone there and waited in line, there are citizens and people who are trying to get IDs that have to bring in their own chair. I watched a man bring in a walker and a folding chair so that he could sit and wait while he got his ID, right? And in addition to that, we could look at a litany of, whether or not there's parking available or an accessible public transportation route that can get you there, or if there's a stair or a bump or a threshold and a door and all of those things, right? There's also a confusing patchwork of policies. This mostly looks at when we're sort of going at a bigger level. What you need to get an ID in Missouri is not the same as what you need to get an ID in Illinois. And one step further about the birth certificates, it's not the same. So you'll see that when we go into the training, the document piece training, that the document requirements are sort of all over the place in terms of what you need to produce in order to get the documents you see. And finally, I want to talk about discrimination. I mentioned it briefly and I'll say it again. we know discrimination against not just at a one-to-one level, but at a systemic level. We know that Missouri's ID laws and policies favor certain Missourians, right? It's easier to get an ID if you X, Y, and Z, if you have the right means, if you can speak the right way, if you can access the right internet tools and do the research and get the things. And it is harder if you are a senior, if you are a youth, if you are unhoused, if you are low income, if you are living with a disability, and so on and so forth. So those discrimination practices are not only individual, but also built in at the systems level. The impact of these barriers are significant, right? We talked about that from the beginning, and I'll sort of circle back to that here. We've done, as part of our statewide work with the Missouri ID Access Coalition, we have surveyed over 500 people in Missouri who have gotten an ID through one of our programs. Over 70% of the people who've got an ID have said not having an ID has meant they cannot secure employment, right? And they cannot cash checks or access financial services. They can't enroll in government assistance like Medicare or Medicaid or SNAP or food stamps, right? Or access basic services, or legal services, permanent housing, right? And even that temporary shelter, 30%, that's wild to me. 30% of the people we've seen cannot access a temporary emergency shelter. Like I'm thinking about right now, I'm getting flooded with emails of warming shelters that are opening right now. They can't get into those places unless you have an ID. And that has real impacts in the health of all of Missouri. I'm going to skip some of our specific barriers here in Missouri. We can come back to that and talk about it. As you could tell, I usually have about 2 hours to do this thing, this training, but there are some significant unique barriers for some populations in Missouri. We could talk about legislation. I would love nothing more than to start the year talking about Missouri legislature, but there's a lot happening here in Missouri that make it uniquely difficult here in Missouri as well. So our program began in 2022 on the shoulders of the longest standing program in the state, which is run by St. Francis Xavier College Church. They started an ID and birth certificate program in 1993, and we emerged through partnership with them to build our weekly program, which we call the North City Photo ID Project. So what is that? What are we doing? What's the offsite clinic? This is what this is. The guts of it are logistical and financial assistance. So volunteers, Missourians come to our clinic and they say, I need help getting my documents. And they work with someone one-on-one to go individually. What do you need to get it? What's your unique experience? How do we help you get those things? We pay for it. We come up with creative workarounds when we need to. We have some unique access to provide things like proof of residency, things like that. And then they leave our program with what they need to go to the government offices and get the documents. So I'm not the government, so I can't produce the documents, but my plan is, and the goal behind this is to make sure they have all of the information and the resources that they need to go be successful at those offices. So let's get into those details. When we run this clinic in Sikeston in not quite 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks, you will all be working one-to-one as application support volunteers, and we'll get into that. But here's what the guts of what you need to get a document like the birth certificate and a photo ID looks like. In our program, we support with Missouri birth certificates, out-of-state birth certificates, and I would include there if someone was born in a U.S. military base abroad, we could help with that. But we don't support with foreign country birth certificates. Missouri non-driver photo IDs, and then we can provide some guidance around replacement Social Security cards, although there isn't a cost for that. And then we can support with voter registration as well. So we'll be able to do all of that in Sikeston on the 17th as well. Okay, you hanging in there with me? I know this is a lot. I'm pushing us through. We've got 30 minutes left. So, when we get into these document details, again, I know I'm going fast. You don't have to remember this. When you get there, we bring binders, we bring tools, we bring each other. So you don't have to remember this. It will all be in front of you and we will work through it together. And our volunteers, I think, can certainly attest. So usually folks up here go through a training and then they shadow once, twice, 4 or 5 times, working with someone who's already been doing it before they do it alone. So congrats to you all, because you're just going to jump in and do it alone, but you won't be alone the whole time. So don't fear, don't fret. This is the overview, so you know what you're getting into. A little baptism by fire, you got it. But you're not alone. We will be there. You will ask a million questions, and I expect that. If you're quiet, I'm going to come for you because I know you have questions and you're not asking them. So Missouri birth certificates is where we're going to start, because most people that we see, I would say 95% or so of the people we see who say, I need my ID, actually also need their birth certificate to get it. So Missouri birth certificates are pretty straightforward. You have to prove your identity, you have to fill out the application, and then you have to pay for it, right? So for identity, you need a photo ID in order to get the birth certificate that you need in order to get the photo ID, right? Or you can come up with 2 documents with your name on it. Now, the Missouri Vital Records offices are pretty liberal in what they will accept for that. So a piece of mail, a copy of an old ID, an expired ID, a student ID, a face sheet from the what's the housing system, HMIS? I don't know if you all use that. A face sheet from a caseworker or any other things like that. Release papers from prison work, right? So that is a pretty easy barrier to overcome. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes folks really don't have anything. And in those cases, at least in St. Louis, we've been able to write a letter that says, this person came to our program, they have nothing. Here's who they've said they are, and that has been enough. If they truly have nothing and we can't give that letter, or that letter doesn't work, we do have the option to apply by mail. And in Missouri, you can mail in an application as long as it's notarized. So those of us that are notaries also know we have to navigate some documentation requirements in order to notarize a thing. But in Missouri, notaries can notarize with credible witness, or if it's the individual is personally known. So if Joey says that Michael has been coming in every day for the last 12 months, so you believe that that's who it is, you're a credible witness to me and I can notarize it, right? So usually the Missouri birth certificate is something that we can accomplish. The cost is $15, and basically in Sikeston, what we'll do is write the check to the Department of Health that's down there, and I'll confirm all that before Friday, but folks will leave then with a check to go into the Department of Health office and get the birth certificate right there on the spot. If folks prefer not to do that and want to mail it in, we'll be prepared to do that as well. Not everyone can apply for a Missouri birth certificate. So in some states, birth certificates are open access. If you know enough information, you can get anyone's birth certificate. That's not the case in Missouri. In Missouri, you have to be an immediate family member, which means parents, siblings, or grandparents. This is not aunts and uncles, nieces or nephews. This is not cousins. This is not step parents, unless you can prove a legal relationship there. Or official representatives. So again, if there's a power of attorney or something like that, if there's an attorney that is involved, that's also acceptable. If there's a medical personnel involved and responsible in person's care, they can obtain a birth certificate. I also want to state here that if the father is not listed on the Missouri birth certificate, they cannot obtain a copy of that birth certificate unless they can prove paternity. Okay. Legal guardians, foster parents, again, oftentimes need to show that relationship. Same with step parents. You have to show the relationship. You don't automatically get it just because you're the step parent, right? You have to show the marriage license, or if there was an adoption, you have to show that as well. Also in Missouri, if you are a homeless or unaccompanied youth, that means under 21 years old, and you lack fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence, then we can help that person obtain their birth certificate for free using a separate verification form. So I'm not going to go into those details, but put that in the back of your brain that if it comes up, there's a way that we can help. The sample that the child support office uses, proof of paternity, yes is my answer. I would maybe want to see what specific document you mean, but as long as it's a government document
Sorry,
that's
I meant like a they do like a saliva test, blood test, those kinds of things
yeah,
to prove paternity for them. So would it be the same thing?
yeah,
Okay.
yep. I don't think the vital records office actually wants the test itself. They just want the like, yep, this is true. I will also say, at least in St. Louis, our vital records office, if the parent comes in and says, I'm the parent and the step parent or the blah, 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 that we haven't had a whole lot of those barriers. It's usually, I think there's a pretty good dose of discretion in there, and the office agents like use their best guidance on whether or not it seems shady or not. That's not really an official response, but but yeah. If there's more documentation, use it, send it with them, and if not, then we'll work around the barriers. There's some other considerations here. Again, I'm not going to go into all of these details because they usually don't come up, but if they do, we'll work through it. If people need to change their birth certificate or amend it or correct it, those are different. There's different processes for that, different costs for that. Sometimes you need a court order, sometimes you don't. So we'll work through all of that together. If folks are trying to change their gender marker, that process has gotten extremely messy in the last year. In August, there were some different changes that the Department of Revenue made that changes how this works. The short answer is you need a judge's order to change your gender or your name. And then you need that certified copy of the judge's order in order to get your birth certificate changed, which you need in order to get your license to or your photo ID to match that identity. So that gets really long and complicated, but again, we'll talk through it. There is a way to get a free birth certificate for voting purposes. And again, because of our experience with how inconsistently that works in the state for Saturday, Friday, we will just pay for them. We're not going to try to mess with getting free birth certificates, but I'll make sure you have some information about that moving forward so that you can assist folks that you serve beyond the 17th in that way. Out-of-state birth certificates, this is the easy part. Here's the process. Figure out the process and then go do it. I am not going to try to tell you how these work because they are all different. Usually, I will say we start as local as we can. So if someone says, I was born in Illinois, I ask for the city and the county first. Sometimes there is a city process that is different than the county process, that is different than the state process. Sometimes all three of those have different requirements in terms of documentation. Sometimes they have different costs. Sometimes they have different processing times. So we start as local as we can and then go back from there. Usually it means there's an application. Sometimes the application has to be notarized. It almost always has to be signed. Sometimes you have to send additional documents with it. Sometimes not. That gets real messy. So there's not like a specific recipe here. But when someone comes in and says, I was born in Arkansas, I'll try not to cuss because Arkansas is a pain in the butt, but we will work through it. We have some internal documents we can use that pull up experiences over the last couple of years to be able to say, oh, this is better, or this is harder, or here's where we could go or not go. So we'll work through all of those. Basically, we would find the application, print the application, and work through it and figure out what we need. Usually we would have to look for a couple of things about where the application can be mailed. So some states require the application to be mailed to the address on the ID if the ID is being submitted with it. And that gets messy if someone has an old ID. So we'll pay attention to that. And sometimes they can authorize, sign like a written notarized permission for it to be mailed somewhere else. But again, that's case by case. So I think I just talked through this. Oh, usually we have to include a return address stamped envelope. So again, if this comes up on the 17th, we'll work through it one by one. And when in doubt, we'll just jump on the phone with the Vital Records office and ask the question. So I have frequently called and said, I see this list of 3 documents online. My client has none of those. He has this and this and this and this. Will that work? And sometimes we can get through that. Texas doesn't give a shit. They won't talk to you about anything. They're a pain to work with. So hopefully no one was born in Texas. But even if they are, we will lovingly and gracefully work through it with them. Again, lots of variance in how this works across the country. The sort of last straw here for out of state is that sometimes we can apply online, and that sometimes goes around the document requirements. So I think we've probably all at some point seen those like security questions online where it's like, here's 3 addresses, which have you ever been associated with? Here's 12 different cars, makes and models, which have you ever owned? If we can get an application that gives us that, sometimes it gets us around the document requirements, but A, not always. B, we won't know until we pay. That's my favorite part. You have to apply through the whole thing, pay for it, and then find out if they say, okay, great, upload documents, which is what you're trying to avoid, or they give you the security questions. And if you can't get the security questions right, then you're back to submitting documents anyway, and that doesn't get around what you were trying to do, right? I will also say this is typically about 3 times more expensive than mailing it in. So for that reason alone, we try to avoid this. This is sort of the like, okay, we're at the end of the rope. We have nothing else. Let's try this. Okay. So again, that will be something that Ashray can do if we need to. It's the back pocket, like, let's try this. There's one more, like, oh my God, nothing else worked. We have no way around it. We have a team of volunteer attorneys, and attorneys can usually apply on their client's behalf. So we have a team of attorneys that would start basically a pro bono attorney-client relationship for the purpose of obtaining a birth certificate. I've only had to go to that team like twice ever. So it doesn't happen too often. We can usually get there without bringing in all of those additional tools, but I want you to know that they're there in case. So after you get your photo ID, usually then we're ready to talk about, after you get your birth certificate, we're ready to talk about getting your photo ID. Gets a little more complicated here. So for a Missouri ID, you need to prove identity, lawful status, residency in Missouri, social security, and then payment. Sometimes there's a 6th piece here, which is if you've changed your name, you have to show that name change. So if you got married and changed your name through marriage or through divorce or through adoption or any other thing that changed your name, you might have to show that here. So for identity and lawful status, generally what most people use is a US birth certificate. Has to be a certified copy. Can't be like a Xerox copy or a copy machine. I said Xerox the other day and someone was like, what does that mean? So just like a plain old copy won't work. Has to be a certified copy. If you are not a US citizen, but are lawfully present in the United States, so that could be someone who's a green card holder or on a valid work authorization or employment-based or family-based visa, then there are other documents that we would use to prove lawful status. But I would say the most common for those first 2 categories is a US birth certificate. Missouri residency, again, the most common is usually a utility bill or a piece of government correspondence. So like folks that have a statement of child support wages due, or a response from Department of Health and Human Services about a SNAP application, or any kind of government correspondence with their name and address, that is good. General postmarked mail is not good. But it is not anymore, so it cannot just be in the old envelope. It has to be government issued mail or a handful of these other documents. This is the summary here. The state has a 2-page list of what those documents are, and those are in the binder, so we will use those on the day of. Most people in Missouri who have had a Missouri ID in the last 10 years can just recite their social security number when they get to the office. If you've never had a Missouri ID or it's been more than 10 years, then you have to show your Social Security card. There are a couple of options, alternates like a W-2 with your full name and full social, which generally never is on there, or a pay stub with your full name and social. Again, also not common that the full social is printed on a pay stub. But otherwise, then we have to go through the process of requesting a replacement Social Security. The payment, the cost of a non-driver ID is $18. Or there are some cases where we can use the free ID. And on the 17th, we'll talk about it when I get there. I think generally our best practice for now is that we inform people about the free ID. We give them a flyer and say, keep this in your back pocket. You can use it later if you're eligible. Today we're going to pay. The reason we do that is because the only people that look bad, if they go to the DOR and say, I'm here for my free ID, and the DOR says, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't do free IDs, or you're not eligible. We're the ones that look bad. And the people that we are trying to serve generally don't have time or capacity to be back and forth and trying to go multiple places to get one thing done. So on the 17th, we're going to pay, and I'll make sure you have information to give to folks so that they know about the free ID to vote program and how that works so they can use it in the future. We talked about that. There are some people that come to our program and say, I really need my driver's license, not my non-driver ID. What can I do? So in those cases, we can say the process is generally the same, assuming they have a valid ID, driver's license, or have had it recently and won't have to retake any of the driving specific like exams or tests or skills. So without that, we can say that if that's all the same, then the documents are the same, the cost is different. So in those cases, someone could pay the cash to us and we'll pay the full price because most license offices don't accept two forms of payment. So we've sent people before and say $18 and you pay the $9 difference. And then they get to the DOR and the DOR is like, it has to be one payment. And then they're stuck with getting the non-driver or paying all of it. So we have some workarounds on that. As I think most of you probably know, the process now is that if you go to the DOR, you will get a paper ID, a temporary one that's good for 30 days. And then they'll mail your plastic ID a couple weeks later. In St. Louis, those applications, we've been getting about 3 weeks over the last month or so. But sometimes I think maybe not over the holidays, that gets a little shorter and it's more like 2 weeks. If someone is unhoused, then we have an opportunity to help prove that they live in Missouri through this special form, which is called 5862, the Certificate of Homeless Status and Residency. So if you're living in the streets or staying in temporary housing or couch to couch with people that you know, coming up with something like a utility bill or government correspondence with your address and things like that is really hard, if not impossible. So if someone, basically the way this form works is someone says, yes, I lack fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence, but I live in Missouri. We say, okay, you're attesting to that. I say this person is attesting to me and I'm an agency that is serving them. So then I sign it and I say they can use our address to get their ID. So Yolanda and I, we can have a conversation about that before Friday and figure out if that will be an option for your organization to sign, or if there's another church or group that wants to participate in that, or if this is not an option for us to use. I don't think I can lawfully, like ethically sign it because I'm not working with the individuals outside of this one-time thing. And would it make sense for their ID to have a St. Louis address when they live in Sikeston? So we'll explore what that will look like before the 17th. We could talk about real and non-real. The IDs that we're working for is a non-real ID. That doesn't matter for now. This law passed, federal law passed in 2003 that started this real ID thing, and it has been delayed implementation since then. Currently, it's delayed to be implemented in May of this year. I am very skeptical that it will actually be implemented in May of this year. But the challenge here is that the real ID has more burdensome documentation requirements. So we can't use the homeless status certification form. You need 2 proofs of residency. You have to have your social security card. You have to have your certified birth certificate every time. So those things generally make it not possible for most of the people that we serve. However, if folks have that and they want to get the real ID and they can, they should. There's no reason that, they shouldn't really do that. But currently, you are not required to have a real ID to enter federal facilities or travel by air. If that goes into effect in May, that will be the change. We talked a little bit about free ID to vote. This is a program that exists wherein if you are 18 years or older, not currently on probation or parole, and do not have a felony conviction related to voting, which no one ever does, but if you meet those requirements, then you can get a free ID from the state of Missouri when you say that you need it in order to vote. This program is not very effective, in my opinion. It's been very inconsistent. So again, this is something that we will make sure that people have information for, but on the 17th, we will not use. We'll just pay for the IDs to make sure that people get them. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. Social Security card. There's no cost. I have never successfully helped someone apply by mail or online. I've only helped someone go in person to do it. You generally have to bring physical copies of documents to prove citizenship and identity. So citizenship is usually your US birth certificate. Again, different if you were not born in the United States. Identity is usually you need a photo ID. But if you can't get a photo ID because you need your social security card, then there's a list of additional documents, the most common of which is medical records with a wet signature. So meaning not something a patient can print from their own portal, but going to a hospital or a doctor's office and having an actual person stamp or sign the records. That's a pain, but it exists and is a way around. Okay, hang in there. We got about 5 minutes left here, and then I will stop talking and we can have conversation. So on the 17th, we'll be prepared to do all of those documents and support with all of that. I think there are 2 pieces here that are important that maybe we haven't talked about. When I show up in these spaces, I'm showing up as a neighbor. I'm showing up as someone that cares and is trying to help someone who lives in my state or in my community access systems that are hard to get to, right? I don't run those systems. I don't manage them. I don't have power to change them right now, but I'm working on it. So my job is not to be the expert. It's to be the neighbor with compassion, right? I have more expertise than a lot of people that come in there, but I don't have all the answers and I don't have all of the control, right? So it's really important to me when we are in this photo ID space, even when we're service providers, and maybe some of you will have relationships with people that are coming in, that we're seeing ourselves as like accompanying and helping these individuals through systems that we all have to go through that we don't control, right? So we're going to ask questions. We're going to say, here's what we know. What do you want to do? Here's the best case. Here's the worst case. What works for you? And we can help sort of coach and guide in that way. And we also have to be creative sometimes. Some of my volunteers know that just when I think we've seen it all, we'll get someone come in with a totally different situation, and we have to figure out and go through a million different things to think through how we overcome the barrier that they're facing. And usually we do, but it takes some grit, if you will, and creativity. So generally, we set up this space so that there's like an intake. People sign in, and then they kind of wait until they're ready, until we're ready. We call people to workstations. Those are the application support stations. You'll have all the tools with you. You'll go through all the document processes. You'll make sure to get the checks from me. You write all of it down. We sign everything. We make sure they don't need voter registration. Every guest leaves with an envelope and next steps pages that has it really clear. Take this, go here, do this. Here's what you need. Here's the paperclip. Here's the packet. It's overwhelming, not only for us, but also for the people that we're serving. So we make it as organized and clean as possible so that if they remember nothing, they can take that envelope and give it to the vital records person and be like, I'm trying to get my birth certificate. Here's these things, and they'll know what to do. So what are those tools I've talked about? We have volunteer binders that are organized by document, that are, I think, pretty clear, that you can navigate. You'll go through, you flip through them like, okay, someone needs a birth certificate. I want to go to the birth certificate section. There are flow charts in the binders that help you go through all of the questions that I was just rattling off. So that's all available to you. There are something that we call the pink sheet, which is the application support checklist. So this kind of goes through all of your process for the day, how you're talking with them, what you're going through, blah, blah, blah. You record it all on here. So these are really important. This is what stays with me. This is how I track who we helped, where we helped, what we didn't help, where I mailed things, what I paid, what I didn't pay. So you'll fill this out and then we keep that at the end of the day. You also have the next steps pages. I have a bucket of supplies that I bring. We also have each other and then ASHRAE staff and volunteers who have done this a few times. Yolanda, I would also put you in that bucket since you've done this a few times, that we can ask each other and work through things together. Hopefully, ideally, right, when we start on the 17th, we could sit together for the first one or two, or you could sort of see how I go through it or how Kristen goes through it, and see what the conversation and sort of cadence looks like before you jump in on your own. If we don't have that luxury, if there's a ton of people that need our support, then I'll be going around. Maybe Yolanda, you would float too. Maybe Kristen would float as well, to kind of help navigate that together. There's not a whole lot that you can totally mess up, right? So the stakes are low in that sense. They're high in the sense that if you do mess something up, like forgot to copy a document, didn't get a signature, then it just delays the process. So the best case scenario, there's sort of like a stopgap measure, is to have someone else check your work before the guest leaves. And just make sure that you say, this is what I did, this is what they have, are we good? And having a second set of eyes on it, make sure that we don't miss anything. We can talk about volunteer roles. Really, all we're doing on the 17th is the application support. So that's what you'll all be doing. I'm a notary. If you have any notaries on staff, great. Otherwise, not to worry. And then we have a variety of other non-clinic roles, but we're not going to talk about that today. Document reminders, again, this is all on the pink sheet, but there are some things that stay with us and there are some things that go with the guest. So again, that's hard to do over Zoom, but you'll see it and we'll go over it on the 17th. I'll try to be there early enough that we can talk through the binders and be ready like at 8:30 so that you can kind of have some time with the materials before guests come in and get ready. So it's supposed to be easy to use and easy to figure out and like navigate as you go. And again, you won't actually be alone, even if you're sitting alone at a workstation. We will all be there together. I will send a confidentiality agreement link so that you can sign that online, and I'll bring some in paper format as well, just in case, so no stress there. That basically makes sure that when ASHRAE does a program, our volunteers aren't sharing confidential information, right? Guests that are coming to us are trusting us with a lot of personal information, a lot of situational information, and it's our job to respect that. So that's what the confidentiality agreement is. We used to say something like, take the lessons, shoot, I'm going to find out what that looks like. I forgot, it's posted on my office, but I'm working from home today. So I do want you to talk about it. I do want you to share your experiences and what you've learned and what you didn't learn and what's totally overwhelming, but don't share the information about the people that you're working with specifically in ways that could identify them. As I mentioned, there are flow charts in the binder. This is sort of what they look like. So there's like a yes, no process. So you sort of start at the top and ask the question, and this should help guide you through each document process as well. This is ugly to look at on the computer, so don't panic, right? But it just know that it's there. I am at time, so I'm going to stop so that we can talk. I will share the rest of these slides that have some things about our statewide work, the sub grants, the ID Access sub grants, what this looks like moving forward, our program highlights. So I'm just having more context in here for you so that you have some sense of who I am and why I'm coming down and talking about all of this stuff, and a little bit of my credentials here. So this is a big effort, and I'm so glad that you all are doing this. This is happening statewide, and we're not reaching everyone yet. We know that. So I'm going to stop there and open for questions. We have about 5 minutes left. It was a ton of information, I realize. So I will say again, everything will be given in person. I will be there early enough on Friday that we can look at things together. We could potentially do like a mock, have Yolanda act like you're coming to get documents, and I can work through it with you so you see the sort of cadence and flow of it. But you'll see it all. It'll all be there.
And while Sarah has shared so much information with us, it is really a lot easier than the information you receive because once you get into doing it and the people show up with partially of what they need, it makes it a little bit simpler, but it really is an easy process. I guess it takes approximately about 15 to 30 minutes per person, depending on the difficulty of their situation. Most of the time, it's like the out-of-state things that kind of get a little tricky, but it's really a great opportunity.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So in my previous life, I was used to help people sign up for affordable healthcare using healthcare.gov, and a lot of that stuff is kind of like uses Experian to determine like basically like an ID form of ID and everything like that. So I guess some of those processes will be kind of similar. Is that fair to say? But
Yeah,
process wise, really?
I think so, in the
Okay,
sense of like, you got to check the boxes.
right.
So it's
Okay.
finding
Criteria
enough
and stuff like
information.
that and
Yeah.
everything. Okay.
So I will also say a lot of folks that we see have stuff, their banking is online or they pay their bills online. And so sometimes folks need help navigating to print a utility bill or print a copy of something from their device. And so we spend time in clinic doing that because that's what they have the information, but not in a format that the government
Yeah.
office will accept it.
Okay.
So some of it is similar in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask if there are any dietary restrictions. We're happy to provide lunch unless you were planning on it, but we'll go ahead and order something. So if there are dietary restrictions, let me know, and we can make sure that I feed us all. I can follow up by email with that, Yolanda.
I don't think anyone, unless Joey, I mean, because I've never had any staff except for one that's not on this call, so I think you're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Great.
You can tell by me I'm not fussy.
Well, I was trying to think, I was like, we have board meeting and I see you eat, so.
Yeah, no, I'm good with everything pretty much. So
Cool.
And then Sarah, you said you plan to get there at around 8:30?
We're gonna try to get there early enough. Kristen, don't be mad yet, but we have to leave St. Louis early enough to get there early enough. So I'm gonna try to get us there around 8 or 8:15 so we have enough time
Okay.
to like set up. And then if volunteers want to get there by 8:30, that should give us enough time to do some like practice and look at the materials and go through things together on the spot. Does that work for you?
That should be, Joey, is that okay? You and I can meet there at
Yeah.
8 and everyone else can trickle in
Yeah,
between
works
8
for
and
me.
8:30.
I'll
Okay,
be there.
perfect.
Great. Obviously, if this winter weather continues, we'll have a whole other conversation next week, but I'm not going to plan for that. So Any questions?
That was good. Thank you. I know we're excited to see how it works and flows.
I
And
know.
if it works pretty good, we were talking about, doing it,
Great.
somewhere between 2 and 4 times a year. So
Yeah, I'm happy. It's a ton of information, no matter how you do it, but it's really, I think Yolanda, like you said, it's still complicated, but it's less to hold when you're doing it in person and it's all in front of you and you just go step by step. So it's a ton to do like in theory, but I think it's important to have this like big dump of like, here's the overview so that you have a frame of reference when you're looking in the one-to-one space. So this was not intended to cause you panic. This was intended to be an overview, but I'll bring all the tools that you need and then happy to continue working with you after the 17th and figure out how best to integrate it into the services that you're already providing. So, okay.
Thank
It's
you,
11:30.
Sarah. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I will be in touch with you because I just had a couple agencies reach out to me because we're distributing this through our partner service agencies. They's like, how can we get this in our area? And I'm like,
great.
okay.
Send it my way. We'll make it happen.
Yep. So be looking forward to hearing from me on those opportunities for you to get to those more southern counties.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. If you have any
Thank
issues or
you.
questions before then, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
yes, thank
Have
you.
a
Have a
great
good day.
Thank you.
week. Bye-bye.
Bye.